The last time you called 911, what were you calling them for? My husband had a heart attack when we were in the middle of nowhere getting firewood. I had to leave him laying there, tried to move him but no way, and run to the truck to get the phone, only to realize there was no signal. But the dogs were going crazy, but I got them loaded up and drove like heck till I finally got through to 911. I told her where I was and what had happened. Then I rushed back to be by my dead husband's side. It took about 40 minutes from when he collapsed to when the ambulance showed up. They still tried to revive him, gave me false hope, and also a fear that if they got him back he'd be brain dead. It was almost 2 years ago now, but feels like yesterday. I'm so very sorry for your loss and grief. I hope time does really heal all around. Woke to the sound of husband making I'm super nauseous sounds. Gets up and goes to the bathroom. I get my boys ready for school and hear him groaning. Send them off. I walk into the bathroom and his shirt is drenched in sweat. I told him to take it off. His skin was grey. I somehow immediately knew he was having a heart attack. He's 37. When EMT arrived they saw him and initially thought I was mistaken and said it was probably a panic attack. They perform EKG in the ambulance and confirm he's having a heart attack. Thankfully the hospital is right down the road from us. When he got out of cath lab the cardiologist said that within a minute or two went into AFib and was shocked twice. They said if I had waited even 3 minutes longer he would be delivering different news. Know the signs. Our life got turned upside down. Glad to hear you got him help in time. Friend of mine called me at a party at 3 AM while I was drunk and high. Said he wanted to end his life but FaceTime with me before that. Went out of the building to FaceTime with him and tried to convince him of not doing it. He planned to go to a bridge and jump from there and called me when he was still at home. My friend was drunk and I tried to convince him of just staying home but unfortunately my convincing couldn't do that much. He said he will call me back in a few minutes to continue talking, which he did, and hung up the phone. In the meantime I went back to the party and told the next person that I need his phone because a friend of mine tries to kill himself and if he wanted to FaceTime me again I would need an internet connection. He gave it to me and I quickly called the police telling them all the details about my friend. I have known him for 6 years by that point but only over the internet, and they tried to find him now. The few minutes had passed and either he called me or I called him. I cannot remember all the details. We continued to talk. He was already walking to the bridge, and I forgot his last name so I asked him what it was with my reasoning being that I wanted to write a goodbye letter after he died and I needed his full name for it. The name was needed for the police to identify my friend and find him sooner. I realized that I had a hard time convincing him to stay alive so I tried my best to stall him. I would for example tell him to check whether his shoes were tied or do anything that would come to my mind to simply delay him in the hopes he wastes enough time and the police can find him that way. I also instructed him to do things to attract attention so a police car passing by had an easier time noticing him. Meanwhile I called the police multiple times and gave them all the details I had on my friend, like his approximate position from what I could guess from the last minutes of conversation. Eventually he just stopped talking out of nowhere and I called the police again. They told me that a patrol picked him up when he was on his way to the bridge he planned to jump from and they were bringing him to a clinic now. The operator thanked me and I thanked her, then I went home since it was 5 AM by that time. My friend is still alive today. TLDR. Friend of mine tried to commit suicide, he is still alive now. Don't mean to underplay the seriousness of this story, but the craziest crap seems to happen when you're high. About 7 years ago, my girlfriend, buddy of mine and I went out to get Starbucks after church on a Sunday. We get a call from one of our other friends who was threatening suicide. The reasoning is kinda fricked, and a bit of a long story. We rushed over and found her in her bed where she had downed a whole bottle of Tylenol 3. No idea if it's possible to OD on those. He called and didn't take long for them to show up. They pumped her stomach and she stayed in the psych ward for a few weeks. She's all good now, happily married with 2 kids. Pharmacist here, you're more likely to OD on the acetaminophen, which is a slow and painful death, than the codeine. I'm glad she's doing okay now. Ambulance for my stepdad this past Monday night. He was complaining of stomach chest pain, with symptoms that sounded like classic indigestion acid reflux. Then he told me couldn't get out of bed because the pain was so bad. He hadn't eaten. drank anything, or taken his necessary medications for over 24 hours. He has a really complicated health history, including being in remission from stage 2 esophageal cancer, so I said frick it and called despite his protestations. Turns out he had a severe bowel obstruction. He was rushed into surgery and they discovered part of his bowel was dying. He ended up having 200 centimeters of his small bowel removed. They had him on a vent afterwards, which was really scary, but he came off it this morning and is doing well, all things considered. I had a cyst rupture and fainted. My husband caught me, but not before I hit my head on the wall. I woke up and told him not to call 911. I was fine, then threw up all over the floor and fainted again. And surprisingly, he called them anyway. A couple years ago, a girl locked herself in the local bar bathroom and didn't come out for a long time. I asked an employee, a female server, who told me, oh yeah, she's in there but better give my freaking pills back. I alerted the bartender, who said it's none of his business and sequestered himself in the office. I checked on the girl and she was unresponsive on the other side of the door. No other staff could be found, so I called 911. A cop broke down the door and found the girl unresponsive. They induced vomiting then and there, took her to the hospital, and I was quickly banned for 6 months because I called 911. Call the alcohol board. Knowing about illegal drugs in a drinking establishment is grounds for them to lose their liquor license. About 2 months ago, I was sitting on my couch at around 2:30 in the morning and I hear a sound no one ever wants to hear. Someone trying to open my front door. I immediately went over to the door, looked through the peephole, and sure enough there's a guy with his head resting on my door as if he's trying to hear inside. I smacked the door almost as hard as I could right where his head was resting on the other side, and as soon as he backs up I can tell this guy is very drunk. I tell him through the door he's at the wrong place, but he just kept trying to get in, sticking his keys into the deadbolt and jiggling the door pretty rough. I keep telling him to get away from my place, but it doesn't work. This went on for about 15 minutes before I decided to call the police. I tell him the cops are coming and he leaves. About 10 minutes later he's back and doing the same thing for about another 30 minutes. The whole time I'm talking to him, telling him he's at the wrong place and he needs to get the heck out of here. Eventually I raise my voice nearly at the top of my lungs, at which point my neighbors start coming out because they hear me screaming and the guy took off for good. The police arrived at 6:30 AM when I had already been asleep for hours. Before then, a few years ago, I was leaving my apartment and found a guy unconscious with no pants or underwear on, laying outside on the second floor of my apartment building. Mind you, it's concrete and was about 30 degrees outside. I called the police and they took over 2 hours to get there. I hope I don't ever actually need them urgently. Holy, the crazy story aside, it's ridiculous how long it takes the cops to get anywhere where you're from. If either of those guys were violent, things could have turned out very poorly for you or your neighbors. I was one of 2 people to watch a man burn alive, technically, in a major car crash. He passed me doing well over 100 as I was going 95 like I was sitting still. It was in the middle of the Tennessee wilderness at 3 AM, about 30 miles from the nearest city, and took firefighters well over an hour to arrive on scene. I came around a corner and distinctly remember thinking that's odd that there's a street light. We're miles from the nearest town. Then I rounded the corner and saw a massive fire in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out and realized it was a car on fire in the middle of the road. The same one that had passed me. I had road flares and threw them in the middle of the road, a coupe 100 yards back from the fire. Then I ran to the burning car on the phone with the 911 operator and described what I saw as I saw it. I explained that I was confused because there was no driver and I went to the passenger side and opened the door and couldn't make sense of the interior. You'd never believe how hard it is for your brain to comprehend the mess inside of a car like that until you experience it. I couldn't grasp what I was looking at, and the whole time the car is on fire and I hear this gasping noise like air escaping from a tire. I finally realize that the mess I am looking at in the passenger corner of the windshield is a person. And I found out later that the noise I heard was something called agonal breathing. This is a term used to describe when someone suffers severe head trauma and the brain is dead, yet the body doesn't understand and continues trying to breathe. It's a horrifying sound. At this point the fire got so bad that I had to back off and wait for fire to arrive. While I waited, there was a secondary and tertiary crash on the opposite side of the road where the guardrail had been peeled up by the initial vehicle and landed in the middle of the road, launching vehicles into the air. By the time I finally was released from the scene by the police officers, the sun was shining through the trees and I stopped at a Waffle House and explained to them what I had seen when asked why I looked so pale. Hugs, you should definitely look into grief counseling. That is a lot to cope with on your own. Like I tell people, you wouldn't walk off a compound fracture of your leg, so don't try and walk off severe emotional psychological damage. I got lost hiking in the mountains. Before that I called them because my sister got lost in the woods. My phone also recently auto-dialed 911 somehow while in my pocket. I have no idea how it happened, but was mortified when I realized what had happened. iPhone had a shortcut where you press the sleep button 5 times in a row, it would dial it. Happened to me twice. Wife woke me up in the middle of the night, saying she heard someone crashing through the window in the other room and they were going through our cabinets. We get up and lock ourselves in the bathroom and call 911. Our dog is nowhere to be found, but he is probably just out there trying to make friends with an intruder. We keep hearing the cabinet doors opening and closing, and zippers opening and closing for about 5 minutes until just before the police arrive. 3 police officers walk around our house and don't see any signs of forced entry, and they look through windows and don't see anyone. Dispatcher tells us to meet the officers outside, which we do. They then clear the house and no one is in there, and nothing is missing. The last place we could look was our bedroom's closet. Open the closet door and our dog just pokes his head out, then starts wagging his tail and saying hello to the police officers. We look inside our closet and all our suitcases have been pushed over and roughly opened. That closet shares a wall with our kitchen cabinets. We figured out that our dog somehow locked himself into our pitch black closet and started panicking and trying to get out, which sounded like the cabinet slamming. Guessing he knocked over the suitcases and either started playing with them or accidentally opening them. TLDR, our dog locked himself in a closet, made it sound like we had an intruder. The police came. No intruder, but our dog made some friends with nice police officers. Then one of the officers gave all of us an impromptu concert on our piano at 1 AM. Good story. Feel kinda bad we wasted the police officers' time in hindsight, but they seemed happy enough to meet our dog, lol. Honestly, I bet they rather go to that call and nothing happened but a wandering good boy being Snoopy than go to a homicide scene or fatal care wreck. When I was 7-8 years old, we had a bunch of ants get in through a small crack in the door, so I called 911 and started crying and screaming. My mom had to pry the phone from my hands and apologize profusely for me being dumb, lol. This is hysterical, I hope you tell everyone this. I found an old man on the ground with his head bleeding. He had walked around the corner to go to Safeway to get fruit, walked back and tripped. All I remember is the blood and fruit falling out of his pockets. His son told me he wasn't supposed to go by myself, but he didn't want to be a burden. He made a full recovery. Christmas morning, 2017. I discovered that my father hadn't moved from his chair since at least 48 hours, judging by the urine smell. Elderly woman walking down the middle of the road in pajamas and bathrobe, turned my flashes on and got out of my truck. I asked her if she was okay. She didn't know her last name, just her first name, and that she remembered she lived in Chicago. We were in West Tennessee, so I knew she had dementia. She wanted to know if I was a good guy. I told her yes mom I was, and that I was going to get her some help to find out where she lived. Called 911 and turned her over to police. It was a chilly day, so they let her sit in the front of the car while I explained where she was walking from, and when I found her, they called about 15 minutes later to let me know they had found her residence and she had wandered off from her son's house. You're so kind. I wish more people were so patient with people struggling with dementia. Woke up to the fire alarm and my hot water heater had 4-5 featuring tall flames coming from it. Our house burned down that day. I live in the south and it was on a Sunday morning, and it took what felt like eternity for the fire department to get there, even though we were walking distance to the fire department. It really sucked. It's been 2 years and it's still hard sometimes. One reason it could have taken an extended amount of time despite being close is maybe the fire department is volunteer, which would mean them getting the page at their house, getting dressed, driving to the station, and waiting long enough for a safe amount of crew to show up. I'm sorry that happened to you. Gallstones. I had gastric bypass a few years ago. When you lose weight really fast, you get gallstones pretty bad. I thought I was having a heart attack. All classic symptoms. My arm went numb. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like an elephant was sitting on me. I barely made it to my phone. Freaking gallbladder. Gallbladder attacks are the worst pain I've ever experienced. If they are 10 on the pain scale, giving birth was a 5. It wasn't me but my grandpa. We've never called 911 after, but my mom fell asleep when he was over. Her eyes were opened and I got scared. I cried and told him. When I told him, he checked on her and then he immediately called 911. Turns out her kidneys failed and she was hospitalized for a month, meaning I saved her life. My dad and mom split up, so if I lost her, I wouldn't have parents. This happened when I was 3-4. You saved your mom's life that day, and you were so young and small. Be proud, my friend. On the flip side, my mom told me I used to rip the legs of insects and eat them when I was your age. The first and only time I have ever called 911 was when my age-addicted brother was overdosing on our kitchen floor. I resuscitated him, and then the paramedics administered Narcan. That was in February 2018. He passed away in November 2020. I was 1,300 miles away. He was alone. Couldn't save him that time. I'm sorry for your loss, friend. It was the morning of my 8-year anniversary, and my husband was mad I didn't wake him up with a foot rub and breakfast. My husband was being verbally abusive and slapped my wrist. The day before he had dragged me through broken glass. 3 weeks before he took me for a car ride at gunpoint. Slapping the wrist and yelling at me were not the worst things that happened by far, but that day, that slap, was what I needed. After I called 911, he smashed and stomped my phone and started his pattern of escalation, and the police came right on time. He locked himself in our home for 5 hours, till the SWAT team was about to go get him, and destroyed everything inside. Bleached all my clothes, broke the oven door, threw jelly from ceiling to floor, literally dumped out all the food in the house. Now his mom thinks I'm a horrible person for not letting him see the kids for the last 3 months. That is awful. Hugs. I am glad you and your kids are rid of him and your monster-in-law. My dad's ex, from before he met my mom, figured out where we lived and started harassing us, breaking car windows, keying our vehicles, etc. One day my dad had enough and confronted her as she was trying to stab our dog. She attacked my dad and had the knife to his throat. I was on the phone giving the operator our address when I saw this. Ran into my parents' room, grabbed the rifle and ran outside while still on the phone with 911. I told that crazy bee if she didn't get away from my dad I would kill her. She finally backed down after screaming back and forth, and then the cops arrived. I still have the occasional dream about this. This is a wild story. Nobody goes near my dogs. BTCH would have been toast. A little girl, about 3 years old, went down the slip and slide at the place I used to work. She sat at the bottom in the landing pool, which was a big puddle that softened the landing for the kids. Her brother freaking crushed her into the mats as he flew down the slide when I told him not to go, and did anyway. He went right through her and she landed hard but seemed alright at first. Kids are rubbery, so we thought she was okay. Then she said my neck hurts and couldn't move her arm or neck or move without basically screaming in pain. The mom was holding her, and she was squirming to get away, still in pain and yelling hurt. We honestly thought she'd broken her neck and we had the mom hold her still and try to calm her down. Called 911 and had them come out and immobilize this tiny little girl on a big bus backboard. Her mom holding her hand and her brother not quite understanding what was going on but worried he was gonna get in trouble. It was tough to watch. She ended up having a broken collarbone and was fine, but I genuinely thought she was going to have a broken neck. UI Druck was there. Crap was whack. Definitely sucks, but a broken collarbone is so much better than a neck or head injury. Wife and I were carers. We had a Down syndrome man living with us. He came down for breakfast one morning and started acting all weird. Quickly figured out it looked like he was having a stroke. Ambulance arrived in about 3 minutes and took him to the ER. He eventually made a full recovery. Gave a dead body on the side of the road CPR. Dispatcher walked me through how to do it. I'm CPR trained, but in that moment, your memory jumps ship. I wasn't able to save the woman, but I gave her my all. Still healing and in therapy to this day. Ate something that did not agree with me and ended up having a severe allergic reaction. Hives. Throat started closing up and I did not have an EpiPen. Had to call 911 and an ambulance took me to the hospital. Got that bill later and made me think I'll call a lift should that ever happen again. LMAO. JK. Anaphylaxis is no joke. Always call 911. Having a sudden allergic reaction to eating something new is a fear of mine. Glad you made it out okay. I dropped my then 3-month-old son onto concrete on his head. I freaked and called 911. Quick trip to the ER. He was fine. I still haven't forgiven myself for that. Every parent makes mistakes. There will be plenty more to be had, but at least you'll always be there for him. An old lady fainted waiting for the subway. I ran up to the surface and called 911 to get people over. Took maybe 5 minutes for paramedics to arrive. My neighbor 2 doors down came outside saying for someone to call 911 because her boyfriend was physically abusing her. I immediately grabbed my mom's phone and called it, and as did my neighbor in the house between us. The boyfriend took off in her truck but was later found and arrested. A pipe burst in my backyard and was quickly flooding it and nearing some electrical stuff. I called the non-emergency line, who said to call the emergency line. Tell them about the electrical stuff and someone respond faster. The emergency line chastised me and told me to call the non-emergency line. Guy sitting next to his motorcycle on the shoulder of the interstate. Looked like he pulled over, got off, and kind of collapsed. I couldn't get over to check on him, so called 911. That was nice of you to do for that guy. He may have just been drunk. Hope that guy is doing better now. A man passed out during a heat wave across the street from my house. A few PPL just stepped over him without bothering to check if he was okay. In a friend's truck on the way to another friend's house when we saw a guy pulled over on the side of the road who had just hit a deer. He was fine, as was his truck. It was roughly 6-7 years ago. I was young and lived alone in an off-street studio, basically in someone's backyard. I'd just come home on my bike and after a moment saw a young man staring in one of my windows, dong out and masturbating. He had to have followed me home. He wandered off. A cop did show up and took notes but didn't really give a crap. I was driving my friend to a doctor's office. On my way there, I noticed a guy in his late teens, early 20s sitting on a bike, and a shirtless man standing in front of him holding the bike by the handlebars, and in the guy on the bike's face, clearly trying to intimidate the kid. It was clear the guy on the bike wanted to leave and that the shirtless guy wasn't letting him go. My friend told me not to get involved, but I knew I should do something. She convinced me to drop her off first and then come back. I came back expecting them to be gone, but arrived just in time to see the shirtless guy slug the poor kid in the face. I called 911 and told them what I saw. The cops arrived in less than a minute. I witnessed the shirtless guy try to talk his way out of being arrested with a very fake incredulous smile, as if he didn't know what he did wrong. The thing that upset me about this situation was that this happened all on a busy street in front of everyone, and I was the only person to do anything, and I only did the bare minimum of calling the cops. A board broke on my deck. My leg went through. The boards bent back into place, and the opening was too small for my knee to exit. I was stuck, and it was snowing. The fire department came and got me out. That's a crap day. It was called on my behalf. I was taking a lobster bath, a super hot bath lol, to alleviate some super freaking awfully painful period cramps. Well, my blood pressure decided to tank and my entire body started cramping up into a ball, and I was slipping down towards the water, and all I could think was, this is it. LOL, but I managed to flip my upper body over the side of the tub, and I always bring my phone into the bathroom with me. Probably the one bad trait being a millennial has taught me that actually saved me LOL. And used my fingers that were at that point cramped up like crab pincers to dial my brother's number, who was the only one home at the time. But as I dialed, everyone else arrived home and I was just able to say I needed help because even my freaking throat was cramped up. They got the door unlocked. It was a thumb lock with a hole on the other side, so a toothpick did the trick. And while I didn't want to die by drowning, I sure almost died of embarrassment as my brother was the one to help me out of the tub. My grandfather called 911, who dispatched an ambulance, and by the time the paramedics arrived I was mostly uncramped but obviously still in a lot of pain. Ended up riding in the ambulance to the hospital. Not without a short pit stop, as halfway down the road 2 guys had stopped in the middle of the road to throw hands over road rage and were blocking traffic. LOL. Then the nurse tending to me thought I was in the wrong ward because he thought I was 12. I was in fact like 21 or something. Threw up from the pain. Was exhausted from the period cramps and the whole body cramps, and went home a few hours later after some nice relaxing morphine to ease the pain. I've been given morphine twice in my life for period cramps. Both times in the hospital, of course, and my god, I wish I would have that to take home since the cramps are god awful. LOL. Also, I wasn't allowed to take a bath or lock the bathroom for months after that because everyone was afraid I was going to drown. Check with multiple doctors and advocate for yourself because no woman should have to live like that. I know a lot of doctors dismiss it, but if your cramps are crippling like that, you may have endometriosis or some other issue. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.